Today, electricity is a necessity for all Americans, and its use has become a hallmark of the modern age. However, most Americans of the industrial era did not have access to electricity in their homes, and the few appliances created at the time were very expensive, far too costly for the average city worker. Even setting up the early wiring system was too expensive. This limited the social impacts of electrification during the industrial era for Americans. However, electrification had a great economic impact on the U.S. This impact was generated from the increasing safety and productivity in factories resulting from the use of electric machines, the creation of a new electricity transmission industry, and the development of electric trains that caused both the shipping of products to become cheaper and a greater efficiency of transportation. The vastly superior economic impact benefited Americans by creating higher standards of living, allowing more access to products, and lowering levels of unemployment and poverty. These economic effects of electrification in the industrial era were more significant than the societal effects, which are limited by high prices and late development. In the year 1831, Michael Faraday figured out how to create an electric current by running a magnet over a wire. His discovery, called electromagnetic induction, opened up a new world of possibilities for developments in the generation and transmission of electric current. Soon after, many technological innovations were created, including Thomas Edison's incandescent light bulb, which was the first invention that gave commercial electricity a purpose. This invention would spark a race to electrify America, to control the thing which the world is now built on. Electrification marks the moment mankind moved on from the primitive and became truly modern. America's electrification was led by two men, Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Both advocated for different kinds of electric currents to be used in electrification. Edison wanted direct current, or DC, and Tesla wanted alternating current, or AC. AC power could be transmitted much farther than DC and at much higher voltages. However, there was not yet practical applications to this type of power. In the 1890s, Tesla built a motor that effectively changed alternating current into motion that could be used in appliances and machines for production. In 1895, Tesla ensured the use of AC power in electrification by creating an AC generator that ran off power from Niagara Falls. The electricity generated powered much of Buffalo, a feat impossible with DC power, which could only be transmitted about 2 miles. Also, a year earlier, AC power electrified the Columbian Exhibition in Chicago, also called the World's Exhibition, that showcased new inventions and technology of the time period. Many social effects that electricity could have had before the end of World War I were limited. Some appliances were created, but they were incredibly expensive, being $10 for an iron, $25 for a coffee percolator, and between $165 to $195 for a washing machine. These costs, adjusted for inflation, are hundreds of dollars today. What's more, even getting the wiring system for delivering electricity to appliances and lights was much too expensive. In the early years of electrification, almost nothing had been created that had any real social impact, as there are few applications of electricity in the home. Electricity could only be used in small heating elements and large clunky motors. But the main thing holding back the social effects of electricity was low rates of rural electrification. It was not practical to lay power lines all the way out to rural America, as there was a low population density, which made profit margins for power plants minimal, if there were any at all. However, more than half of America's population lived in rural communities, as opposed to large cities. This meant that electrification had very little impact on people socially, as only 10% of rural America had electricity even by 1932, and by 1920, only 35% of American housing, both rural and urban, received electricity. Less than half of Americans actually had access to electricity, and thus more than half couldn't experience its social impacts. Though electricity had limited social impact on Americans of the industrial era, its economic effects were widely felt. Electricity increased efficiency in factories and provided ventilation, allowed for the cheaper shipping of products, created a greater market for transportation, and created a new electricity transmission industry. Before electrification, steam engines were used to power machines in factories. One central steam engine would power every machine in the factory. It did this through a series of belts and pulleys called belt drives. However, these belt drives were very inefficient, and between 30 and 85% of energy output from the steam engine was lost in the transmission. This problem could be solved using group or unit drives. Group drives had multiple electric motors, each powering a small number of machines arranged in groups. This system was better, but it still used belt drives. However, energy loss was reduced. Unit drives gave each individual machine a small electric motor. This eradicated the belt and pulley systems that had eaten up so much energy in the factory. Both systems increased the efficiency of the factory and allowed for the streamlining of design. This could occur because designers no longer had to centralize the designs around one large steam engine, and space needed for belts and pulleys was less. Electric motors also found use on farms, in plows and other machines, but farmers had to generate their own electricity, which was more expensive, so the idea was not as popular. Electricity also powered ventilation systems in factories, which helped prevent fires and explosions these factories were prone to. Not only did this mean more safety for laborers, but the owners of the factories could spend less money on insurance. This electricity consumption created a demand for electricity met by the electricity generation industry. Electricity was generated in large, centralized power stations. These stations could service a large area using AC power. The more customers a power station had, the more efficient it was. This was because more customers created a greater load factor. Load factor is the amount of power being used from a station at a time. The greater the load factor, the more power that was being transmitted or actually used, which caused less energy loss. The need for electricity in factories, homes, and streetcars created high demand for electric power, which helped the industry to grow. An increase in efficiency of the power stations allowed for costs to be lowered, and so factories, homes, and railroads had to pay less for electricity. Finally, electric railroads were developed that cost much less to operate, and this meant that prices for shipping goods and general transportation were far lower than with steam-powered trains. However, using these trains for freight was not popular in some cities because they could not efficiently carry heavy products, such as stone or coal, in large amounts. The trains were primarily used for transporting produce and other food items and packaged merchandise. As a result, electric trains had the greatest economic impact on farming districts, such as the rail line Toledo and Western, of which 40% of their business focused on the shipping of products. Economic effects of electrification had a huge impact on America. They increased the standard of living, gave Americans more lifestyle choices, and lowered levels of poverty in the U.S. A higher standard of living was achieved mainly through increased wages, but also through the lowering of prices of products and services. The increase in productivity gained from unit drives allowed for factories to spend less money on energy, and this extra money could either go towards the laborers' wages or the product produced by the factory would be reduced in price. This meant that the factory workers had higher incomes, and they would therefore be able to spend more towards increasing their standard of living, health, and emotional well-being. If the extra money went to making the products cheaper, then more people would be able to afford the product and would be able to receive the product's benefits. Economic growth of power stations allowed more and more people to afford electricity as prices became cheaper, which meant higher standards of living as people could use the electricity to power appliances and light bulbs. Also, the lowered electricity prices meant even less money spent by the factories on energy. Economic growth in factories and power plants meant more jobs for Americans as they could afford more workers. With more people and jobs, unemployment rates were lowered. Also, with the ability for companies to pay employees more, the amount of unfair wages was reduced, which decreased levels of poverty, especially in cities. Finally, with more jobs opening up in cities, Americans had more choices of lifestyle. People could move to cities to find work if they wanted, or they could lead a quiet agricultural life. This increase in choice gave Americans more freedom. Electrification changed the way America used energy, from its factories to its homes. It was this that allowed America to catch up with industrialized countries like Britain, France, and Germany to become a major economic power.